My name is Clara, I'm 36 years old, and I want to tell you about the Saturday afternoon I walked into the spare room of my own house to look for a box of winter clothes and found instead a drawer full of brochures for apartments in a city 400 miles away, lease agreements with my husband's signature, a bank account statement I had never seen for an account I did not know existed, and a folder labeled Simply Transition that contained, among other things, a printed timeline with a date circled in red that was 11 weeks away. 11 weeks, I kept thinking about that number as I stood in the spare room with the folder in my hands. 11 weeks is not a vague someday, 11 weeks is a plan with a deadline. 11 weeks is a man who has been sitting across from you at dinner and sleeping in your bed and telling you about his day and asking about yours while running a parallel operation so specific it had its own folder and its own timeline and its own circled date on a calendar that you were never supposed to see. I want to tell you about the specific experience of discovering that the person you built your life with has been building an exit from it with the same hands, that the life you thought was shared was, at least on one side, already half-packed, and I want to tell you what I did in the 3 hours between finding that folder and hearing his key in the front door, because those 3 hours are the reason the story ends the way it does. This is a story about betrayal, yes, but it is also a story about what happens when a woman who has been underestimated decides to stop being surprising and start being unstoppable. If that is a story you need today, stay with me, subscribe to Unspoken Truth, because what I found in that drawer and what I built in those 3 hours changed everything that came after. I had been with Marcus Webb for 8 years, married for 5. We had met in Chicago when I was 27 at a friend's dinner party where we had ended up as the last 2 people at the table arguing pleasantly about whether a film we had both seen was brilliant or overrated. We had been on opposite sides of the argument and had somehow ended up exchanging numbers anyway because the argument had been the most alive I had felt in a conversation in a long time and I had not wanted it to end. Even when I lost it, which I did, eventually, gracefully, on a second date over better wine when he made a point I could not counter and I had said, "Fine, you're right," and he had looked at me with such genuine delight at being conceded to that I had thought, this person is going to be in my life for a long time. He was a financial analyst, precise and methodical, the kind of man who kept spreadsheets for things most people managed with instinct, who researched decisions other people made on feeling, who had a relationship with information that was less about curiosity and more about control. I had found that quality grounding early in our relationship, the steadiness of someone who does not do things impulsively, who thinks before he speaks, who plans, and I had not understood until that Saturday afternoon in the spare room that the planning had not always been in service of us. We had bought the house 3 years into the marriage, a 4-bedroom in a suburb of Chicago that had more space than 2 people needed but that we had justified on the grounds of the eventual home office, the eventual guest room, the eventual family we had discussed in the vague and uncommitted way of 2 people who want different things and have not yet been honest enough with themselves or each other to say so clearly. The spare room had become storage, the comfortable catch-all of a house with unused space, boxes of things we didn't need enough to unpack and didn't want enough to discard, and I had not been in it in 3 months, which was, I understood now, exactly the amount of time Marcus had needed. I was looking for my heavy wool cardigan, the one I had packed away in April when the weather turned and that I wanted now because October had arrived with the specific cold of a Chicago October that does not negotiate. I had gone through the hall closet and the bedroom closet and had remembered seeing the box of winter clothes in the spare room the last time I had been in there. I had gone in with no particular attention, no reason to be careful about what I was looking for, just a woman on a Saturday afternoon looking for a cardigan. The drawer I opened was the second one in the small dresser we used for overflow storage. I had opened it looking for the box lid because the winter clothes box had been sitting lidless the last time I saw it and I thought the lid might be in the drawer, and what I found was not the box lid, it was a manila folder on top of a stack of papers, and I pulled it out because it was in the way, and I opened it because it was in my hands, and I read the first page because the first page had my husband's name at the top and a city I did not associate with our life at the bottom. Denver, The lease agreement said, a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had never heard of, signed by Marcus David Webb, dated 6 weeks ago, monthly rent, 12-month lease, move-in date that I calculated forward from the date on the document and that landed, with a precision that felt deliberate, on the circled date in the transition folder, 11 weeks from Saturday. I put the folder on top of the dresser and I opened the drawer further and I found the rest of it, the bank statements for the account I did not know about, 18 months of deposits, regular and incremental, the specific savings pattern of someone building a fund for something they have not told their spouse about, the brochures for Denver neighborhoods with certain streets circled in pen, a printed email from a company in Denver confirming an interview scheduled for the following week, an interview Marcus had not mentioned, would not have mentioned, was planning to attend without telling me. I stood in the spare room for a long time. I want to be honest about the physical experience of that standing. It was not dramatic. I did not sink to the floor. I did not cry. I simply stood in the specific stillness of a person whose understanding of their own life has just been substantially revised and who is still in the early seconds of the revision. I stood and I looked at the folder and the drawer and the brochures with the circled streets and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me. Given everything, you have been planning this for at least 18 months, and I have been living inside the planning without knowing I was in it. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I closed the drawer, and I walked downstairs to the kitchen and I put the kettle on because I needed something to do with my hands while my mind did what it was doing. And I made tea I did not drink and I stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard we had planted together 2 summers ago and I thought about what I was going to do next with the focused attention of someone who understands that the next decision matters more than the feeling, and the feeling was enormous, but the decision was what I needed. I called my friend Sonia first. Sonia Park had been my closest friend since we were 22, she was a corporate attorney in Chicago, the specific kind of friend who picks up the phone on Saturday afternoons and does not require context before she starts being useful. I told her in 10 minutes, the folder, the drawer, the Denver lease, the 18 months of secret savings, the circled date 11 weeks away, and Sonia was quiet while I talked and when I finished she said, okay, Clara, here is what you need to do in the next 2 hours before he comes home. She walked me through it with the precision of someone who has spent 15 years understanding what matters legally and what does not. She said, I need you to photograph everything in that drawer, every document, every page of every statement, the lease, the email confirmation, the folder, everything, send it all to me right now, she said, and then I need you to think about your joint finances. What accounts do you have together? What assets? What does the mortgage look like? I need to understand the full picture before I can tell you where you stand. I went back to the spare room with my phone and I photographed everything, every page, front and back, every statement, every brochure, the circled streets, the printed email, the transition folder with its contents in sequence. I sent it all to Sonia in 4 batches and she was quiet while she received them and then she said, Clara, this account has been running for 18 months. The total in it right now is just over $40,000. I need you to understand that in Illinois marital assets include funds accumulated during the marriage regardless of whose name the account is in. This money is not entirely his to take. I said, what do I do? She said, you call Diane Mercer. She is the best family law attorney in this city and I am going to call her myself right now and tell her you are going to call her in 5 minutes, she said. And then you go back downstairs and you finish whatever you were doing before you found the drawer and you let today be what it looks like from the outside, and tomorrow morning you are in Diane's office. She called Diane, Diane called me. I was on the phone with her for 22 minutes on a Saturday afternoon and at the end of it she said, come in tomorrow at 10. Bring Sonia if she's available, and I want you to understand that the position you are in right now, with documentation and 48 hours before he suspects anything, is a significantly stronger position than the one you would be in if you confronted him tonight. Do you understand that? I said, yes. She said, good, go finish your Saturday. I finished my Saturday. That is the only way I know how to describe what the next 4 hours looked like from the outside. Marcus came home at 6 with groceries and the easy energy of a man who believes his Saturday has been exactly what it appeared to be. He made dinner, we ate, we watched something on television. He asked about my week and I asked about his, and he told me about a project at work with the fluency of someone who is not thinking about Denver or the transition folder or the circled date 11 weeks away, and I listened and responded and was exactly the person he expected me to be, and inside that performance I was doing something else entirely. I was watching him with the new and complete attention of someone who understands that the face across the table is not the full picture, who is filing everything she sees against the information she now has, who is for the first time in 5 years of marriage seeing this person clearly rather than through the soft filter of trust that had been doing some of the seeing for her. He was a good performer, I will give him that. The ease was real or seemed real or had been practiced long enough to become real, and I thought about 18 months of transition planning and $40,000 saved in increments and a lease signed 6 weeks ago, and I thought, you have been doing 2 things at once for a very long time, and you are very good at it, and I am about to be better. I slept that night with the specific controlled stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment, not well but enough, and at 9:30 the next morning I was in Sonia's car on the way to Diane Mercer's office with a folder of printed photographs of everything I had found in the spare room drawer. Diane Mercer was a small woman with the specific density of someone whose authority lives in precision rather than volume. She had 22 years of family law and the particular quality of someone who has sat across from enough people in crisis to have developed a relationship with it that is neither alarmed nor indifferent but simply focused. She looked at the photographs I had printed and she asked questions and she listened to the answers, and at the end she said, "Here is your situation." She said, "The $40,000 is marital property and we can address it through the proceedings. The lease he has signed in Denver is his personal liability and does not affect your claim on the marital assets. The job interview he has scheduled suggests an intention to relocate that is relevant to questions of domicile and to the jurisdiction in which proceedings would be filed. What I want to do today is file a petition that establishes this jurisdiction clearly and that triggers the financial disclosure process before he has the opportunity to move funds. This can be done tomorrow morning, and I want to do it before he attends that interview next week." I said, "What do I do about the house?" She said, "You stay in it. It is the marital home and your right to occupy it is established. He can choose to leave or he can stay until the proceedings determine the disposition of the property, but you do not leave that house." I said, "When do I tell him?" She said, "After I file tomorrow morning, I will call you when it is done, and then you tell him." I said, "Okay." Sonia drove me home and sat with me at the kitchen table for 2 hours while I made lists of everything I needed to know and everything I needed to do, and we went through each item with the methodical attention of 2 women who had been friends for long enough to have each other's particular kind of intelligence memorized. Sonia knew how I thought and I knew how she thought, and between us we covered the ground that needed to be covered. The financial accounts I had access to and the ones I needed to document, the mortgage and whose name was on it, the assets we had accumulated across 5 years of marriage, all of it mapped and photographed and sent to Diane before the sun went down. Diane filed on Monday morning. She called me at 10:47 to tell me it was done, and I sat at my desk at work with the phone against my ear and said thank you and hung up and took 3 slow breaths, and then I called Marcus. I said, "I need you to come home tonight, I need to talk to you," and he said, "Everything okay?" And I said, "Come home and I'll tell you," and there was a pause on his end that had a texture to it, a slight recalibration, and he said, "Okay, I'll be there by 6. He was there at 5:58, because Marcus was the kind of man who was early when he was nervous, and I had always known that about him, and now I knew why he was nervous. He came in and looked at me with the specific expression of a man trying to read the room and not being able to, and I sat him down at the kitchen table, the table we had chosen together at a market in the West Loop 4 years ago, and I put my phone on it with the photograph of the transition folder on the screen. I watched him look at it, I watched the recognition move across his face, and then I said, very quietly, "Diane Mercer filed this morning, the accounts are already part of the disclosure process, the Denver lease is documented, the interview you have scheduled for Thursday is documented, and I want you to understand that everything I have just said has been in the hands of my attorney since yesterday morning. So whatever you are about to say, understand that the conversation we are having right now is not the first conversation that has happened about this." He was very still. I said, "How long have you been planning to leave?" He looked at the table. I said, "Marcus, I found the folder, I found the account, I found the lease, I found the circled date, I know the shape of it, I need you to tell me how long." He said, "About 2 years." 2 years, I let that land without responding to it immediately. 2 years of planning an exit while living inside the life he was exiting. 2 years of dinners and weekends and conversations about our future while maintaining a parallel document called transition with a circled date on a calendar. 2 years of being in 2 places at once and doing it well enough that I had not seen it. And I thought about the spare room and the drawer and the Saturday afternoon I had gone looking for a cardigan and had found instead the truth, and I thought, you almost made it, you were 11 weeks away, and you left a folder in a drawer. I said, "I think you should stay somewhere else tonight. I think you should take what you need for a few days and go to your brother's or a hotel, and I think we should let Diane and whoever you choose to work with handle the rest of this, because I don't have anything else to say to you tonight that belongs to me and not to them." He left at 7:15, he took a bag, he said my name once on the way out in a way that had an apology in it without being one, and I closed the door and stood in the hallway of my own house and I breathed, once, twice, until the shaking that had been in my hands since Saturday afternoon finally stopped. The divorce took 11 months. It was not simple, but it was not the fight it could have been because Diane was thorough and the documentation was complete, and Marcus's attorney understood early that the position his client was in did not support an extended contest. The $40,000 was divided as marital property. The house was bought out at a value that was fair and that gave me enough to stay in it if I chose or to move if I chose. I chose to stay, not because I needed to hold on to something but because I had chosen every detail of that house and the choosing had been real, and I was not going to let someone else's exit reclassify my choosing as a mistake. I repainted the spare room. I want to tell you that because I think it matters. The room where Marcus had kept his transition folder and his Denver brochures and his circled date. I emptied it and I repainted it a deep sage green, and I put a desk in it and a chair I had wanted for years and a lamp with warm light, and it is now the room where I do my best thinking. The room that was the site of the thing that broke the marriage open is now the room where I go when I need to be clear, and I find that appropriate. I find it exactly right that the place where the truth was is now the place where I go to find more of it. Sonia comes over on the first Friday of every month and we cook and talk, and she stays too late and I don't mind. Last month she sat in the spare room chair while I was at the desk and she said, "You know what I think about? I think about the cardigan. You were just looking for a cardigan." And I said, "I know." And she said, "I think your body knew where to look." And I sat with that for a moment, and I think she might be right. I think the body sometimes knows before the mind is ready and sends you into a room looking for something ordinary and lets you find the thing you actually needed. I think about those 3 hours between finding the folder and hearing his key in the door, about the decision to photograph and replace rather than confront, to call rather than react, to build something solid before I said a single word, and I think about how different the outcome would have been if I had done what the feeling in my chest was asking me to do, which was to call him and say, "What did I just find in our spare room?" To give him the warning, to hand him the advantage, to let my shock become his information, and I know, with the clarity of someone who has seen how the other version would have gone, that the 3 hours of stillness before the storm were the 3 hours that determined everything that came after. This is not a story about a marriage that failed. Marriages fail, that is ordinary and painful and survivable. This is a story about a woman who found out her marriage had not failed but had been abandoned, quietly and carefully and from the inside, and who decided in the 3 hours she had that she was going to be the one who controlled what came next, and who was right about that. The spare room is sage green and the desk is mine and the lamp has warm light, and on the difficult mornings I go in there and I sit and I think and I come out clearer than I went in, and that, in the end, is the only review I need. My name is Clara, I'm 36 years old, and my husband spent 2 years planning to leave me from inside our marriage, and I found out 11 weeks before his deadline because I went looking for a cardigan, and I spent 3 hours building something he couldn't walk back from before he even knew I was building it, and everything I have now I kept because I was quiet when every part of me wanted to be loud. Thank you for listening, take care of yourself, and remember, the stories that change us are rarely the ones we saw coming, they are almost always the ones we found while looking for something else entirely.